Timespinners is the first Metroidvania on PC to allow you to change button display from Xbox to DualShock to Nintendo to keyboard. Beautiful. Love it. Timespinners, as you might infer, deals with time and time travel. We meet our protagonist, Luna. That's a nice name. That's the name of my cat in Monster Hunter. I won't really be going into depth on the story because I think it deserves its own video, but I will state that Luna has many parallels to Alucard. You have a close relationship with your mother. Your father is evil. You must eventually confront him, and perhaps in Luna's case, gain most of your supernatural abilities from his line. That last point still needs some confirmation, as the game is a little ambiguous about that, probably on purpose. But the thrust of the story is that the evil empire is seeking out the Timespinner. Your clan is its guardian, and so far y'all have barely kept things together. And then the evil empire arrives. The main mechanic of this game is the ability to freeze time, and I really love this concept. And unlike in Soten, in Timespinners, when you freeze time, you can scamper and clamper around on enemies. In fact, it's encouraged. You see, there are puzzles that require enemies to be froze in a particular position so that you can reach a chest or an area. These puzzles are too few, too far apart, and really, while you feel clever solving them, you're usually just baiting an enemy to charge, freezing time, and then jumping on them. So I don't know if I would really define that as a puzzle. I do wish there had been more puzzles that were more well thought out, and more mechanics with freezing time. In the game, when you freeze time, you can't move enemies, you can't hurt enemies, you can really only just reposition yourself. It would have been cool if we could have moved enemies, maybe not all of them, but some. You could tie it to a glove upgrade that allows you to handle temporal objects, and maybe even some kind of shatter spell that would completely destroy an enemy. The more mass an enemy has, maybe the bigger refund on sand that you would get from this spell, as when they shatter they would just dissolve into sands of time. Sand, by the way, is the resource that freezing time consumes. It is separate from your mana, which this game calls your aura. I think that ultimately this freezing time mechanic did not reach its full potential, and that sucks, because it could have been much cooler. That's really a theme in this game too. It could have been much cooler. The problem that I find in a lot of Metroidvania titles is that developers can be afraid to let the player get to absolutely broken levels of power. Timespinners does not shy away from that. However, given that you are basically the matriarch of time, your brokenness in this game should have been staggering, at least by endgame. You may have interpreted what I just said as, I want the game to be easier. No, that is not the case. I want more tools to navigate and exterminate. I want them to be cool, and I want them to be in theme with someone who is a master of time magic and time travel. Instead, what I got was some balls that can gently slap the faces of my enemies at high speeds. I think what is frustrating for me is that there are these glimpses of thoughtful design that you see every now and again. Like, for example, when you die for the first time, you unlock your first familiar. That's a great way of saying, damn, you suck. Here's a little helper, maybe don't die next time, asshole. I actually really like that. I probably would have restricted it to a few more deaths, and maybe have the familiar that you unlock through death be a healing type, but honestly, you're probably not going to die in this game, and that's not a bad thing. Don't get me wrong, I love a challenging game, but things don't always have to be challenging to be fun. Finding ways and builds to break a game can be fun, alternatively being incredibly powerful itself is fun. And then conversely, when you are so powerful, it can be quite pleasurable to find ways to limit that and modify the way you play the game. And as far as Metroidvanias go, developers really seem to miss the point that movement and movement options are not only important, they are vital and should be fleshed out. I already know this is something that I'm going to repeat a lot in this series, but moving around the map, castle, space station, forest, ancient ruins, wherever, it should be fun. And please take note, you should give your player movement upgrades early and frequently so that they can experiment early on, you know? You don't give your players the keys to the kingdom at the end of the fucking game. And that's exactly what happens in Timespinners, except instead of the keys, it's more like just the key ring, because all you get are speed boots and an infinite jump, similar to the gravity boots from Soden. And again, here's the sad thing about this. These speed boots, which I wouldn't really call speed boots, but whatever, used in conjunction with freezing time is actually a pretty fun way to get around. But I feel resentful for getting this 15 minutes before the game ends. Were you afraid to get speed boots early on because your backers would have zoomed through the game even faster? And let's not discuss the gravity boots, which you get literally at the end of the game. It's as if the developer is saying, oh damn, you remember those actual 3 spots you couldn't get to? Well, here's the item you need. Make sure you go back for 100% completion. I just cannot fathom why you would do this. Unless you think the linchpin of the Metroidvania genre is backtracking, in which case you're a fucking idiot. I'm sorry, that's just how it is. If I've made it to the end of the game, I should have already been given the tools for 100% map completion prior to strutting into the final boss's chamber. It should be the player's decision how much they explore before ending the game. Or you were afraid your backers would beat the game in 1 hour as opposed to 3, so you put the boots at the end of the game. Which is it? I mean, when you were testing this, did anybody say, oh, thank God, I finally have the boots, I can backtrack now? Now, you might say, Timespinners doesn't have much of a map anyway, so is backtracking really that big of a deal? Yeah, absolutely it is. And I feel like some of the design choices here were influenced by the fact that this game was crowdfunded. You know, these games get put on a timeline once people start giving them money. And you have a few options, or a few end results. The first one is the game gets made, and it's terrible. The second option is the game doesn't get made, and you never hear from the people ever again. The third option is the developer takes their time, and when the game finally gets pushed out, it might be good. I personally do not like developers, especially independent developers, being beholden to a ravenous mob. Now, there are some developers who have enough of a backbone to say, hey, you know, we are going to do this the way we're going to do it, and when it's done, it's done. I do think that Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general is a curse and a blessing for games. On the one hand, you've got to get the money somehow. And when it comes to obtaining that through a crowdfunding source, how do you do that? Well, generally you make these promises in the form of these tiers, and the more money we get, the more things we're going to add to our development scope. So we're going to add multiplayer, we're going to add 5 more bosses, we're going to add another playable character. And what happens, what can happen, is that your scope is now even more insane than it already was. And where previously you found comfort in knowing that you finally have secured some funding for your game, there is only a disquiet, sinking feeling that you're unsure that you're really going to be able to deliver on these promises. And after all, no one, especially on the internet, wants to hear you say, I thought I could do something, but I can't. Did that happen here? Well, probably not. The only stretch goal that I see is a challenge dungeon, which did make it into the game in the form of a challenge hallway. And honestly, I would be a little upset if I sprung extra money in the hopes of getting the challenge dungeon, but really my bone to pick here is the progression of movement options, which is something that is grossly overlooked in the Metroidvania genre. And speaking of the Metroidvania genre, this game included the backdash. Thank God for that. Why is it that every Metroidvania game feels compelled to add a backdash? I mean, the backdash in Soden wasn't really useful beyond moving around quickly. It didn't have iframes. So why do developers include this backdash, then do nothing to improve it? I do think that the backdash is a tricky thing to balance. If you move too quickly backdashing, then the player is just going to backdash for general movement because it's faster. And that can feel silly and can be exhausting and painful if you have arthritis. If you include the backdash, please give it some utility, maybe some invulnerability frames, or if you backdash into attack, it modifies the attack, or I don't know, do something with it, for God's sake. Don't just carbon copy stuff, please. Thank you. The soundtrack is obviously inspired by Castlevania, and that's a wonderful thing. There's some real bangers in here. There's some morose tunes and ambient tunes, which fit in well with the nature of the game and time travel in general. That's really all I have to say about it. You should really check it out. You know what else is fun to check out? Chests. Yeah, like treasure chests. Chests respawn in this game. That's a no-no. Don't do this. It takes away the pleasure of finding a chest, because you're about to get a consumable or some item that is really of no consequence. There are some chests that are marked differently or are bigger, different color. These trappings of the chest signal that there will be something different. So if it's a wooden chest, okay, I'm probably getting a consumable. If it's an opulent chest, I'm probably getting some kind of stat upgrade like sand or hit points. The thing is though, there are better ways to do this. Honestly, I'm not even sure you need to be bombarded with health and mana consumables, but if it was a concern, then just increase drop rates on enemies to drop those consumables. Or have faith in your player that they'll just buy consumables from the merchant. The whole reason that thing exists. The problem here is I'm not interested in identifying and remembering each level of a chest and what it may have in its drop table. Sure, when I see a chest, I will still go out of my way to see what's in it. However, in my heart, I have already resigned myself to expecting some kind of flat jerky instead of some kind of stacked upgrade or voluptuous orb that allows me to throw the moon at enemies. Maybe I'm beating this point off too much, but you don't want your players to feel like going after a chest or anything that signals a player is getting a reward to feel like a chore. I started going after chests more because I started to become fearful that I might be missing out on something as opposed to, hell yeah, a chest. And that's a problem. You know what else is a problem? Quests. Quests. Bro, come on. Here's the thing with quests in this game. They're there to enforce structure of play. In a Metroidvania title, that genre that has exploration as a cornerstone, getting lost on a planet or in a castle. Who the fuck thought of this? One of the first quests you get is to find alchemical tools. It's a simple fetch quest, and I'll probably talk about this more in a follow-up video, but it's such a needless quest. At least the way it's presented. You just met someone. They want you to find something that is in a dangerous area. Y'all ever think about how selfish this is? I lost my Dark Souls 2 Stilton game case. Can you please go retrieve it from the Neat on Haunted Hill? Granted, in this game the item that is being looked for is used in making powerful artifacts. So where's the problem then? That's a legitimate request, isn't it? Sure, but you don't have to set the quest up like this. We're going to go where the tool is located because that's the only option we have anyways. So we're going to get the alchemical tools. It's just a matter of how the game presents this to us. The first option is what we have in the game. An NPC flags us down, tells us please find these tools. Then we do, because again, it's our only option. Or the game doesn't mention the tools at all, doesn't mention anything about a quest, no quest tracker, none of that bullshit in my Metroidvania, thanks. And when we kill the boss that the tools are located near, we get some fanfare and an item that states, hey, these are tools. For alchemy it looks like, and maybe it has an initial engraving on it. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't say anything other than alchemical tools. Then, when we get back to town, the same NPC says, whoa, those are alchemical tools. I thought they were lost to time, yuck yuck. I wanted to bring it up, but we had just met and I didn't want to request your aid in locating them because I didn't want to put you in harm's way needlessly. And in this case, the NPC turns out to be our love interest, so it would have paid off later on that they cared for our well-being. That would have been incredible. But that's not what happened. Instead, we get a generic quest lobbed at us, so, that's cool. Oh, Yeah, our captain also blew the bridge out so that the local critters would stop encroaching upon our camp. And wouldn't you know it, just a little bit later, she starts asking us to kill local critters so they don't encroach upon our camp. So I guess blowing up the bridge was fucking worthless. There's one last thing I want to discuss to highlight the quality control, or I guess the sloppiness in this game. There's a gentleman that you save in a cave. The cave itself has these giant mushrooms that obstruct your path. After you save him, he warns you about mushrooms emitting the spore. And it's not just after you save him, it's actually after you save him and then do a quest for him. The second quest, he says, hey, by the way, those spores might fuck you up. Yeah, that's a little bit late there. It's a simple oversight. And listen, when I point these things out, I'm not trying to crucify developers for a simple mistake. It's more for people that are interested in game development to think about, how can I avoid fucking that up? And what are the consequences to my player's headspace if I make this mistake? In this case, I believe it probably was just him reshuffling some parts of dialogue and obviously forgot about it. Who knows? I don't. But why is this a problem? Maybe the character didn't know you already dispatched a mushroom, despite said character being holed up in a cave that had a giant mushroom guarding the entrance and exit that you have to kill to gain access to. Even if it were true that the character didn't know our prior relationship with mushrooms, the advice is still too late. The game developer knows this, and you know this, so don't waste dialogue on it. Never mind the fact that players have two options when facing the giant mushroom. Respect it or don't and get poisoned. So to get back to what I was trying to say here, this shows to me the developer maybe meant to have said this earlier, which if it had been said prior to me facing a mushroom, I would have overlooked it, even though I think it's kind of needless advice anyway. The thing is though, we're told after the fact, which for me pulls me out of the game to think about how this occurred. How did it make it through playtesting? Does this developer really think I need this warning? You could have easily shifted his dialogue about mushrooms to the very first character you run into in the area, and it would still make sense. Watch out for giant shroom spores. This kind of thing can disconnect the player from the game momentarily. It's just sloppy. Further, why would I even need a warning? Let the player get poisoned. Let them learn on their own. This really goes back to developers having no faith in their players, and honestly, who can blame them? But when you are creating a game, you should put the utmost faith in the player, because even if you warn people about a deadly invisible disease that is airborne and it can slowly disable you and potentially kill you, they're going to disregard that, and they're going to wonder, while they're face down, watching their life drain away alone, why no one warned them. So just don't fucking do it. How about that? Part of playing a game is learning. Have we all forgot that? Isn't that one of the fun parts of a game? Change log. Don't make this game. I do not relish criticizing games like this. It's frustrating to see a game that could have shined brightly, then it just doesn't. There's nothing worse than wasted potential. This game is heavily marred with terrible writing and terrible design choices. It's still fun. I certainly enjoyed it despite all the shortcomings. There are some great segments in this game, specifically the Sandman Encounter. That fight alone was really bittersweet. On the one hand, it was incredible, and on the other hand, I wanted more of that. The developer proved that they had what it took to make an interesting and exciting boss fight, but then it's the only one of its kind. Fighting bosses and stopping time is also a guilty pleasure. Do I want to learn a pattern or just say, fuck it, I'm gonna freeze time? That's really cool, and it allows the player to modify the difficulty of the game in a thematic way. I think it's awesome that developers didn't try to nerf time freeze against bosses. It's just sad to see them give the player that kind of agency over the game, and then in other aspects just railroad the player. Maybe they just ran out of time.